Hey guys, my name is Matthew. Today we're talking about Keep Sharp, Build a Better Brain at Any Age, a book written by Sanjay Gupta. Here we go. Keep Sharp is a book written about brain health. It's science-based and it's really actually pretty relatable, so don't feel like it's overwhelming in the science kind of side of it, but it's all about dementia and Alzheimer's, but more importantly, it's about generally your brain health at any age, as evidenced by the title. This book has 3 parts. The first part is all about the brain, generally. Obviously, the whole thing is about the brain, but the first part is about kind of its anatomy, what it actually looks like. There's some really cool and vivid descriptions of the brain that kind of give me a different perspective on what the brain is and what it actually is about. It looks a little different than I kind of imagined it did. And like I said, it's just really interesting. This is all from the perspective of a neurosurgeon, which is really cool. So it's factual and not just someone guessing or describing it in a textbook kind of format, but instead it's an actually really cool description of the brain. The second part of this book is all about the practical ways that you can actually improve your brain's health. Part 2 is really the most exciting part for me in this book. I really gained a lot of information here. It's all, again, science-based. So he's got lots of research studies to back this stuff up. He's not just making it up, but it's all legitimately science-based. And when it's something that is a little bit controversial, he lets you know, hey, this is what I believe about this. There's a lot of science to back it up, but there's some science that, says something different. He lets you know about those things as well, but there's so much really practical advice in part 2 I really appreciated. Part 3 is for if you know someone or if you have been diagnosed with dementia, Alzheimer's, things like that. Lots of really good practical advice in there for what you do, how you do it, specific actual resources for you to go and reach out to, websites, phone numbers, things like that. And just really well done kind of primer for if you're just getting into having received a diagnosis on dementia or Alzheimer's. In this review, I'm going to be making a list of different aspects of this book. I'll be listing them from roughly my favorite things and moving down through the list to a couple things that I didn't like about this book as much. And then at the end of this review, I will tell you who I think this book is for. One of my favorite things about this book, it's something that starts from the very beginning and goes all the way through, is just his emphasis on neuroplasticity. There's a sense that he believes that the brain can be changed at any age, that it's constantly changing and adapting, and that we have real control over what our brain does. This is kind of to debunk a myth that our brain is very static and it doesn't change very much, and after childhood is pretty much the same. And he says that's not true at all. What I really love about this is the sense of hope that it brings in this book. The hope that, hey, even if I'm diagnosed with some kind of brain disease or I feel like I've done a really bad job my whole life of taking care of my brain, I haven't been doing the right things, he says, you know what, it's not too late. There's a sense that the hopefulness in this book says, actually, the neuroplasticity of your brain means you can work on it right now, today, and end up better off because of it. Your brain never stops changing. And according to Gupta, that's a good thing. It means that you have the opportunity to do something good for your brain today. I love that in this book, just that hopefulness. Another thing I really liked about this book is the updated science. That is to say, most of the studies, the vast majority of the studies that he pulls from aren't from like the 1950s or the 1960s, where a lot of my information about the brain probably still comes from. Instead, he's really picked up studies that have been done in the last 10 years mostly. He's got studies from 2015, 2017, even as recent as 2019, that is kind of giving us information about the brain in literally the most updated science possible. I really appreciated that because actually studies done in the 1900s, they're not necessarily relevant. The science wasn't updated enough. We didn't have scanning capabilities and the autopsies weren't as clear, and so it's really nice that he's updated all those science things and that there are really great research studies that are really interesting that a lot of them I had never heard of or seen before, which is great. I really like the style of this book. It was written maybe similar to the book Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, which is one of my favorites. I think that this is written, like I said, very much like that. So if you enjoyed a book like Why We Sleep, this book is going to be a good book for you to read. I think you'll find it interesting. I think there's a lot of great information in it, and I think it's really relevant. But the way it was written, the style is very similar to Why We Sleep. Another thing I really enjoyed about this book is how many myths it debunked. That is to say that while there's a section where he debunks 12 specific myths, like the most prevalent myths about brain information, things like you only use 10% of your brain, which is totally bunk, and that everyone is doomed to dementia if they live long enough and things like that. He kind of takes those myths and he just debunks them kind of in a very specific section of the book, but also throughout the book, he's consistently kind of picking up little bits of information that I believed about the brain. And he's saying, actually, this part's not true. That's old science. We used to believe this, but actually scientists now, universally don't. It's just not true. And we were wrong when we believed it before. And so that was really interesting. And I think I really enjoyed that, kind of seeing, oh, actually, that's something I believe. And he goes, nope, this research study proves that wrong. Another thing I really liked about this book is how relatably he wrote it. I feel like a lot of times with books on science, there's kind of two like extremes you can hit to. One, it's really easy to be like patronizing and to talk down to your reader and explain things in a really simple language that's too simple. And then, like I said, you just feel patronized the whole time as you're reading it. Or the other way you can read it is you don't dumb it down enough and you just got like research terms and science things and you assume your reader knows too much and it's written like a research paper. And what I really like is he grabbed a great middle ground in this book. I didn't feel patronized the entire time. I felt like it was readable, that it was interesting, and it, for the most part, kept my interest throughout the entire book. I think he did just a great job of explaining all the science and all of the researchers and where he got the information from, and explained the studies in a way that it was really easy for me to grab hold of and enjoy. A couple things I didn't like about this book as much. One is the combination of repetition and length. The book is pretty long. It took me a minute to kind of get through it. And that's not such a bad thing, except that I felt like he was repeating information quite a bit. There was a lot of information, especially following some of the practical pieces where he would say, here's the research behind why something is a good thing to do. And then he'd come forward again and say, well, here's now the fact that you should do it. And then here's how you should do it. But the information felt very repetitious. It was like, get moving. They say get moving for at least 20 minutes a day. And therefore you should get moving for 20 minutes a day. And how you should do it is you should walk for 20 minutes a day. That's an oversimplification of the repetitions, but I felt like there were a lot of different aspects where he repeated things 3 or 4 times. And like I said, it's kind of a longer book. And so I feel like that could have been done better, maybe. The other thing that I didn't enjoy about this book as much, and I do want to say I love this book. It's probably going to go into like my kind of set of books that is like my top tier. I've really enjoyed this book a lot. So these negatives aren't big negatives, they're little ones, but I feel like the intro felt a little overhyped or a little overpromised to me. There's kind of the sense that he's like going to create a super brain inside of you and it's going to be the most amazing brain because of these tips that he's got for you. But then the tips are really mundane. And maybe that's the trick. I think that is the trick, is actually it's not that hard to create a brain that's healthy and doing much better than if you were doing these other things. But the intro made it sound like I said, just overhyped and a little bit overpromised. And so that's a minor negative as well. So who is this book for? To be honest, I'm going to have a hard time not recommending this book for everyone. I think I'm going to spend the next several weeks or maybe months talking about this book too much. I'm sure my wife is going to get tired of hearing about brain health because I love books like this, and I really think this is a book that most people could get a lot out of. Even if you thought, actually, I don't like reading really long books, you could potentially just pick it up and read part 2. And I think that you would get a lot of information from that that's interesting and relevant and practical to actually be able to change some aspects of your life. Even if you only took a couple things from part 2 and you were able to change a couple bits, I think you could really see a lot of big improvements on your life just based on some pieces brought out of part 2. Again, I thought the research studies were interesting, and I think that this book is written for, in an accessible way that nearly anybody could read it and get a lot out of it. This has been my review of Keep Sharp, Build a Better Brain at Any Age by Sanjay Gupta. If you enjoyed this content, do feel free to like and subscribe, and as always, stay safe out there.